I'm Leslie Cerier. I'm also known as the Organic Gourmet. I'll give you a little bit of background of how I got to do what I got to do, which I love. I am known as the Organic Gourmet, and I'm a self-taught chef. I have a master's degree from Columbia University Teachers College. I'm from New York City, and I've been living 30 years in Western Massachusetts in Shutesbury, in the forest, which I love. Clean water, beautiful land. I built a natural, passive solar home. I have a big organic garden. I have a great community, and I love life, and I love to eat. And the way that I learned how to cook was having this master's degree in movement sciences and education, which actually is kind of like an alternative term for physical education. So I was a tomboy, and I played a lot of varsity sports, and when I graduated college, I didn't really know what I would do, so I went ahead and got a master's degree in the same thing, which brought me into learning more about dance and creative movement and psychology of sport and philosophy of movement. And all of a sudden I started to think, I'm not so excited about keeping the score at the volleyball game anymore. I'm interested in the joy of movement. And I started taking a lot of bodywork classes, massage classes, still playing tennis, still swimming, still staying very physically active. And in one of my university teaching positions in Eastern Kentucky University, I had a neighbor who was studying nutrition. I was like, that's it. That's what I want to know. And a colleague brought me to a natural food store. Now this was in the late 70s. There weren't any cookbooks back then. And I had these nice 2-hour breaks, and I would go in and I would quiz the owners and say, what's this? And how do you cook it? Because I was seeing beans and grains for the first time. I didn't grow up eating beans and grains, you know, a little bit here and there. My grandma Ethel made kind of like a mushroom barley soup. I didn't grow up as a vegetarian. I didn't grow up, you know, seeking out organic, natural foods. My mom taught me how to shop, which was wonderful. She told me, you know, you go here and get this price, and you go here for that price, so you run around a lot. And now, with CSA's community-supported agriculture, you can eat really cheaply all in one place. And I don't know, do you have CSAs around here? Yeah, so it's really the best deal in town. It costs me about $12 a week for more fruits and vegetables than I could possibly eat. And actually, some of these are from that CSA as well. So every week I would go and I'd quiz the owners, what's this? Come home, I would keep a journal of what I was eating. Just lists of ingredients, never thinking I would write cookbooks. And lo and behold, over, I guess that was late 70s, I guess we're looking at 40 years later now. Like 40 years later, I'm not old enough to be this old, but I am. 40 years later, I developed recipes for individuals, for natural food companies, for organic food companies. I teach cooking classes. I train chefs all over the world. I just kind of followed my passion, followed my bliss, and just keep inventing more and more recipes as I go along. And I'm really about nourishing sustainability. This talk is about how to feed, please, and nourish everyone. And that really, for me, is the art of self-care. As I was driving over, I was like, you know, what is this really about? You know, we have eaters now who are sitting at the same table who are carnivores, people who are eating everything, they don't even read the labels, people who are plant-based, people that are gluten-free, people that are wheat-intolerant deniers. We have vegetarians, vegans, people who are none of the above but aren't eating dairy, people who are not eating sugar, people who are eating it because it has sugar, you know, all kinds of different personalities sit down together at the table to hopefully have a happy experience sharing food. Did I mention anything that you have questions about so far? Okay. So are there specific questions that you have about how to please and nourish and feed everyone? Especially as we go into this holiday season where sometimes excess and overindulgence kind of makes you feel the next morning like you're like, oh, like a bus hit you or something like that.
The season of gluttony. It starts at Halloween and ends at probably Valentine's Day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sugar overload.
Yeah, now there's definitely ways, as I've written in cookbooks, as I've taught in classes, to make overindulgent food with whole, real foods. You know, for me, like refined sugar doesn't even exist in my house. That's just, you know, bleached sugar. So I don't really want to eat chemicals. But if I'm looking for sugar, living in New England, maple sugar is a great substitute. I do a lot with maple syrup in my desserts. I might use honey as well. I might use some coconut sugar. So you can take all these like whole real foods and just swap out commercial foods that actually are warming our planet. You know, like all the things that get imported and then processed and then added chemicals to preserve them. So they'll be on the shelf even 100 years from now. And all those pesticides and insecticides and herbicides, those all warm up the planet. So if I'm thinking of how to please and nourish everyone, we're also looking at how do we make food that we like. You know, for instance, like when I cook for my family, I think of, okay, what's in season? What am I in the mood for? What did I just make last week? So I don't want to repeat that. What does so-and-so expect me to have? And really, like, what's going to light me up? Because as I'm excited about making food, that means that my love is going into the dish, which is the most tastiest ingredient of them all. Feel free to ask a question if you have. Otherwise, I'll just keep going. But really what I'm thinking of more and more is more a spiritual connection to cooking. So all the hands of love that have touched my food from the seed to the table. So in other words, like organic has gotten big business. And you've got some things that are being shipped in and they're in plastic packages or they're loaded with all kinds of unrecyclable packaging. That kind of stuff is organic certified, maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's certified, maybe it just puts a label on natural, maybe you buy it, you're in a hurry. What kind of consciousness are we putting in our bellies from the seed to the table is kind of what I'm thinking of these days. So it's not enough for me to say, okay, this salad is organic because it came in a plastic box, and then I open the box and somehow it keeps miraculously for a couple of weeks. If I'm going, you know, like, it's shipped in from California, we're in Massachusetts, and it just doesn't have the same vitality, the same taste, the same flavor, to me the same nutrition. Because sometimes nutrition is about the state of mind that I'm in when I'm eating it. For instance, many, many years ago, as I started on my evolution of being an organic gourmet chef, I studied macrobiotic cooking. And there was a term of macroneurotic. So everybody was like, you know, is it this, is it that, you know, is it good, is it, you know, and all that stress while you're eating, while you're cooking, in my mind also goes into, you know, what you're tasting. Are you tasting? Are you savoring the moment? Are you enjoying? Are you having an excited curiosity for what's in your plate, what's in your mouth? Are you taking the time to taste it, to smell it, to look at it, to really fully engage your senses? You know, like these vegetables that are here, some of them you might say, well, what is this? You know?
It's a Daikon Radish.
It's a Daikon Radish. And do you know what this one is?
Is it a kind of beet?
This is actually a purple Daikon Radish.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah. And this one, any idea what this one is?
beet?
This is actually, I hope, it looks like a beet. This is a rainbow radish.
So are they all radishes, everything there except that carrot?
Actually, yeah. I kind of said, okay, what's in my fridge? What is in season? And sometimes when I'm thinking gluten-free, I'm not necessarily looking for a gluten-free exact substitute. For instance, a lot of gluten-free food, to me, is not healthy. Like I've seen gluten-free breads loaded with sugar and xanthan gum. Now, xanthan gum, when I wrote a gluten-free cookbook, I got a package of xanthan gum and never opened it. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I see it in all these gluten-free products. It supposedly holds things together, but you don't need it. And gum gums up your gut. So if you've got any kind of digestive issues, you don't want to add more gum. You don't want to add more things that are going to get things sticky in here. Because if you have any food sensitivities, you want things that are easy to digest, things that you're going to eat with a lot of joy, things that you're going to really enjoy. Enjoy, enjoy, enjoy. So there's no like, hold your nose, this is good for me, eating things. It's like I brought all these things hoping that you may not know all the different foods and you get to expand your repertoire. So for me, having a dip, I could think to myself, well, I could have vegetables, I could have crackers, I could have bread, I could have chips, and in all those worlds, there's more than what I just brought here. And the more power that we all have as shoppers, we can go into any store that is just a middle person, a middleman, middle woman. They're just stocking shelves. So if you say to them, gee, I want to have, coconut flour wraps, and they're like, what are those? I'm like, okay, well, everybody on paleo diet is all about those. And I was just at a friend's house about a month ago, and she had them, and you didn't need to do anything but open the package, and she wrapped up a beautiful goat cheese, fresh vegetable, avocado wrap, and it was easy, and it was delicious. I was like, oh, cool. And so I love learning about new ingredients. That's really fun for me. Any questions or comments so far? Well, want to taste some of these fruits? All right, so this Daikon Radish, and these I washed. They have a beautiful.
Do you ever use raw slices of turnips? Because I think of them as being sweet radishes.
Yes, especially in the summer when there's those very, very.
The purple tops.
Well, the purple tops I think of this time of year, and those, sometimes if I'm cutting them up for stir fry or making a roasted root, I'll definitely munch on those. And yeah, anything.
They taste a lot like radishes, only sweeter.
Yeah.
The little white ones too.
Yeah.
Yeah, some will get really big depending on how much rain, some will be little. Yeah, it's like, and that sweetness is part of the seasonality of what you're eating as well. So sometimes as the seasons change, certain foods like in the summer that really were like, oh my gosh, the tomatoes are just incredible and all the heirloom varieties. And then you come to this time of year and you're getting, still you might find some greenhouse tomatoes that might be good. But then like in February when you're getting tomatoes, they're not really fresh, they're really local. So as the seasons change, the turnips, which are harvested right now, taste so good because we're really eating now.
But a lot of people cook them. And a lot of people don't like cooked turnips, but they're really, really good when they're raw.
Yeah, and so as you serve turnips to people, you might decide to put them on a platter with whatever you're serving, or just to have some raw vegetables. So many people as a hors d'oeuvre are just like chips. Well, you can have some chips, you can have some turnips, you can have some Daikon radish, you can have some purple Daikon radish, you can have carrots, you can have rainbow radish. So these have a beautiful palette, and I think of these as sweet. So, we're almost eating a work of art. Yeah, it's really beautiful. And one of my favorite vegetables for sure. And then, because these are all organic, I don't worry about peeling them. You know, a lot of people will say, well, you know, I peeled it, so what? And I'm thinking, well, the ground didn't get peeled, the farmers didn't get peeled, the air and the water didn't get peeled. So I'm always thinking, I'm willing to pay a little extra for organic, or at least that's the way I used to think before I joined my CSA over 30 years ago, where it's actually cheaper to eat local and organic. So, because it's a small group, feel free to come up, and Joe is photographing me. He may get the back of your head. Is there anybody here who might feel like, oh, don't photograph me? Just in case the side of you comes up.
I don't like photographs of me from the back, so.
Okay.
I'm going to try the rainbow radish. I've never had that.
Okay, I'll cut that up.
You just did.
What's that?
Oh, no, I mean the one.
The
that you
daikon?
just cut.
Yes.
Yeah, I've never had it. I've never had this one before.
Yeah, please come up.
This is, what's the name of this one?
This is a purple daikon radish.
Yummy.
It is good.
Yeah.
I love purple. Sometimes I have trouble with peel because of the fiber.
You have trouble with some?
I sometimes peel things because of the fiber in the peel. It might be much for my stomach.
Uh-huh.
These
What's
are phenomenal.
Yeah, my favorite. And they're kind of, I think this might be the first year my CSA or the second year my CSA, so I'm seeing them. Sometimes, you know, everybody's like all about like the daikon radish, which we know. Sometimes these are like 3 times the thickness, you know, you can use it as a club. Maybe like pickleball, there'll be daikon ball, something like.
There's a farmers cooperative in Lancaster, and I think that it's called Rural Farmers or something like that. And I think that they mostly sell down in the Boston area.
Might be Bolton. Bolton Flats, Bolton Flats.
It's
right?
on Golden Flats, yeah.
Yeah.
And I know they were at some of the, when there was the thing on green.
She cannot eat the skin. The inside is
Oh,
fine. The outside is a little bit like, I think.
Yeah, it has a little kick to it.
Yeah,
Right.
that's why she doesn't.
Yeah.
Just a
Yeah.
little.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just
some,
a little.
yeah, it's not horseradish, which will really clean out your sinuses, but
Yeah.
the radish family generally also, like if you're stuffed up, it will help dissolve. Would you like another piece without the peel? I almost brought it for you.
So
It's still a radish.
I have a question. So when you say in season, the greenhouse product is not considered in season?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that. Well, if it's grown like this season and it's in a greenhouse, then I would say sure, because it's grown in this season. So for instance, like I know farmers now who are, you know, still bringing in some tomatoes from their greenhouse. And some people are growing greens in a great greenhouse right now, because the salad greens right now are, if they were out last night, they probably got frosted. So so I think of in season as being harvested now.
Okay, so that's still considered in
Yes.
season? Okay.
Because sometimes it's like, you know, tomatoes in a greenhouse in December still are not getting the kind of sun and warmth that they need. And then sometimes some greenhouses will have like wood stoves or some kind of heat in there, and sometimes it's a green heat. You know, they've got like solar panels that are
So I don't know a lot of farmers, so where can you find the vegetable is, oh, this is in season, this season should have this vegetable, or this vegetable should not be considered in season. Is there some reference you can?
Yes, if you're shopping in, say, a natural food store, you can always ask who's ever stocking the shelves. Sometimes things will say local. For instance, near me in Amherst, there is some local organic ginger and turmeric being grown. And they've got big greenhouses because those things grow naturally in the tropics. So when things grow in the tropics and you're creating something in the season now to sort of warm it, that's still local. So a lot of times at the point of purchase, it will say local. You can also look at things and go, you know what, you pick this up and, like you pick up the radish and it's kind of floppy, you're like, well, it either wasn't cared for well, you know, it wasn't refrigerated right, or it wasn't, or it came from a long way away. Certain things will say from California, and then you know that's not local, and that's their season, not here. So for instance, if you're buying greens right now, the kale, the collards.
So in season is relative to local?
Yes,
Okay. So even they produce in season in California, it's not considered in season?
here, it's not in season.
Okay,
So for
what-
instance,
what's
right-
the difference? Like in terms the nutrition, everything, why is it different? Like they ship here, suddenly something changed?
Well, the most nutrition is pick it, eat it.
Okay,
So that's going to have the most nutrition from the earth to your mouth.
but even your local store, you don't know how many days they, right?
Right, but that's where you go into like your gratitude, you're feeling content, balanced as you're eating it. But in your local store, you might say, you know, where'd this come from? Oh, this came from a farm out in New Jersey. Oh, well, that means it had to be picked maybe yesterday, 3 days ago. Or they said, oh, actually, we got our delivery on Tuesday. And you go to yourself, well, today's Saturday. So in certain times of the year, that would be fabulous. But this time of the year, what's local and in season are a lot of the root crops, cabbages, kale, collards, onions, sweet potatoes, different kinds of winter squash, beets. That's a pretty good, you know,
So
escarole.
maybe, I'm sorry, just ask a question, something from California to here. Let's say you air shipped, right? 1 day, 2 days. And what is lost during this 2-day shipment?
Well, for one thing, did the vegetable get x-rayed? You know, they take, what is lost, I can't say for sure, you know, exact, because even in an organic apple tree that might be grown in the backyard here, some of the apples on one side of the tree getting more sun than some of the apples in the back of the tree could have a different nutrition. So what is lost if something took 2 days to get to you? A little bit, you know, not being a scientist. I mean, I could say if I pulled this out of the ground today and I took a analysis of something like this coming from California, what's the difference? And that would be in the taste. You could taste it. You could say, you know what? When I tasted this on Saturday, it had a little bit of sharpness, sweetness. When I'm tasting it later in the week, it's kind of, doesn't have much flavor. So sometimes flavor is an indicator. You could go, this doesn't taste like much. So as I'm eating it, I'm not excited about it. So I'm also going for nutrition in terms of your state of mind, your well-being, your appreciation of when it comes into your mouth as a measure of nutrition. But the further it comes, the more the fresh picked spark of the harvest is missing. And then all the hands of love that touched it to put it in the crate, to take it out of the crate, to put it on the shelf. Did people just like throw it there and then they're lighting a cigarette as, you know, and they're like mindlessly doing things, or are they really using their heart and their hands to go, oh, I know people are going to eat it, my neighbors. I want to make sure it looks beautiful. I want to make sure that it is as good as it could be. So sometimes we're eating love, and sometimes it's science. It's like, all right, that was picked last week. It's not as fresh as the strawberries that I picked in June. Just, you know, if you get strawberries this time of year, they could be marked organic. They're not going to taste as fresh and sweet and juicy as the strawberries I picked in June. But they're going to look like a strawberry. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. I think, what about avocado?
That's a great question too, because avocados do not grow here.
And they have to wait until they can eat,
That's
right?
right.
So what happened there? So it's like, because you have to wait to get the softer so you can eat it. Like too hard, you have to.
That's right, that's right. Like in 1993, when I wrote my first cookbook, The Quick and Easy Organic Gourmet, I was all about, I wasn't thinking about stuff shipped. Usually things were picked at peak freshness, and then you eat them. But with avocados, at this moment, because with the climate changing, who knows, they're coming in from Latin America, South America, far away from Bolton, Massachusetts. So some are being picked green, and some are, by the time they ripen, are kind of bruised. And then you have to really understand when they are ripe, so you could miss it. There's a little way that the stem, where the stem was on the avocado tree, when that gets a little wrinkled, that's when it's ready. So you got to catch it when it's really ready, and then if you eat the whole thing, so once you open it, if you only ate like a little bit of it and you left it out to oxidize, you're going to lose some nutrition that way. So I usually open an avocado, I eat the whole thing.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, there's like, how did you preserve it? Once you opened it, did it oxidize and then turn black? Yeah. Lots of different considerations, and also your trust. The one last thing I want to say about avocado is sort of like on that list, which keeps changing. Like, these are the foods that you don't have to worry so much if they're organic, because they have a skin. And I think, yes, we do. We want everything to be grown sustainably, again, because whatever's sprayed was in the earth that nourished that plant, and was in the air and the water. So even though the avocado has a skin on it, you're not going to eat that skin, or the banana, you're not going to eat that skin. I think we're going to respect our community of farmers and growers so that they are also well nourished and well taken care of while they're growing the foods that are coming to us. Yeah, not to beat the dead horse.
And we do have a lot of local farms in this area, so it's great in the summer and the fall, winter. And I heard somewhere there's a winter farmers market, maybe in Harvard, I'm not sure. But then I'm assuming it's all the stuff that they say, like the squash and that kind of stuff, summer, fall, winter. But
There are, in the Amherst, Northampton area, about an hour away from where you are, farmers markets all winter long. And some of those farmers have big greenhouses, and they are growing salad greens all year round. And then at a certain point, and we're down to like our rutabagas and our turnips and our beets, and we're like, okay, let's just get something fresh, supposedly, and just buy something that may not be in season. That's when the mangoes, they run a sale at the co-ops or at the stores, and you're like, okay, I want something else, and then you buy them, and some of them are really not ripe. But it's something else. But there are, and the way that you'll find more of these opportunities is if you keep asking and looking. Because if people know there's a market, there's natural food supermarkets, and they will often have, it may be more money, it may not be more money, the farmers may have a deal, so I'm going to bring you my produce all year round.
Deborah's in Concord is pretty good.
Yes. More questions?
I don't know if it's related to the topic.
Sure.
Like for example, in Chinese culture, right? They rarely eat some things raw, right? Except probably cucumber, tomatoes, right? Everything else is cooked, right?
Yes.
So how do you say, oh, this one you can eat raw, don't worry, and this one you cannot. Like for example, the U.S. culture, I can see it, cauliflower, all the things you can just dip it, you just eat it, right?
Yes.
I say, okay, but in China, we always cook those. We don't eat raw. But my question is, okay, how do you know this thing you can eat raw? No problem, but the other thing you don't. Is that like everything you can eat raw?
Well, that's a great question. You know, sometimes certain things are cooked because we want to make sure that nothing bad is on there. You know, if it's organic, like I remember many years ago, I was working with a naturopathic doctor, a doctor of natural medicine, and we were doing a recipe for a book together, and there were some parsnips in the recipe, and she nibbled on it raw, and I never had that raw. And I was like, oh, and she says, yeah, it's like a carrot. And I realized, you know what, for me, a parsnip is sweeter when it's cooked, so I would enjoy it more. But you can eat it raw. So for me, when I know that it's organic or sustainably grown and raised, and I want to nibble on a cauliflower, I'm going to nibble on it. I'm not going to worry about like cooking it to get any residue of anything off, even though that's not really real. Certain cultures, you know, certain cuisines, things are made cooked. You know, and then here you are in the United States, and it's like people are nibbling on cauliflower raw. They're not putting it in, say, an Asian stir fry, or they're marinating it in a salad, or they're just putting it out as a dip. So always it's like, well, taste it and take your time. See how your body, what lights you up, what doesn't. You know, so it's like, oh, gee, raw cauliflower is a different taste. It's a little sweeter if it's steamed. Or it's got a different flavor if it's been stir-fried, then it's got all the different spices that are it's cooked with. So sometimes it's like, oh, in my culture we don't eat it raw, but here I am and I'm curious. Okay, my curiosity is going to be satisfied if I taste it. And when I taste it and everybody else is eating it, I think to myself, oh, do I like that? Do I not like that? Do I need another bite to know if I like that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, the things on your table, in your opinion, that's basically when you say eat it, you eat it raw, right? You're not going to cook it.
I'm not cooking here. However, if I wanted to make a dish, a roasted vegetable dish, or a stir-fry dish, or a soup, or a stew, I can cook these vegetables.
Okay, so you do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no stove here.
Okay.
So
yeah, I got it. I just, okay.
Yeah, and whenever I teach a class, I'm always thinking, how can I expand people's repertoire? Like, I figure you all know carrots and celery, so no point in that, except, you know, for color. These carrots were fresh dug, and they're absolutely super sweet, and I brought a cilantro olive dip from my cookbook, and it's nice to be able to have a dip with raw vegetables. Some people will lightly steam vegetables. You know, you can be super creative too. And I think that's what I encourage and what I like to do. I like having this excited curiosity of like, what is this like? Oh, I like that. And I've also cooked the Daikon purple radish, and it's wonderful, and then it gives also an artistic palette to the dish. So I've got a little purple. You don't always get purple. You know, you've got like a purple cabbage, a purple Daikon radish. You might have a purple potato. So it's kind of nice to have different colors, whether you're eating them raw or not. Like a potato, I wouldn't eat raw. You know.
Yeah.
A sweet potato I might not eat raw, but sometimes it's like, you know, I'll open a delicata squash and I'm like, is this sweet? I might smell it and I'll go, wow, that's really sweet. I might taste it. Like the other day I had a personal chef job and the woman wanted a pumpkin butternut squash soup, and I grated up the butternut squash and I could just smell how sweet it was. So I knew it was going to be sweet. So I'll often smell and go, do I want to taste that? Do I not? You know? Yeah, because culture is interesting. At various times our cultures have a certain cuisine, and that's what our genes, that's what we grew up with. And then you come into the big melting pot of America, and it's like all of a sudden what are we eating? And what is this? And do I like this? And does it make sense? Is it in season? Is it fattening? Is it good for me? You know, all these worries are also what you're ingesting as you're eating it too. Or you're like, oh, great, I'll take that. You know, some people are wildly adventurous with food. And some people are like very cautious, like, you know, who is this woman, Leslie? And so she's been doing this for over 30 years, but would she bring something that wouldn't be delicious? Can I trust her? And yeah?
So I think it's called blanching when you boil water, just like I'll throw broth in, just barely cooked, but just not super raw.
Mm-hmm.
I want to try roasting vegetables in the oven. I've literally never done it. Do you have any suggestions for roasting vegetables?
Sure. When I roast vegetables, I like to put them in a covered, I use like a cast iron enamel pot. And then when I roast them that way, they're not all dried out. I know a lot of people will put things on pans and they'll roast them, and then sometimes they like it a little crispy. Or they'll cut them thin, you know, so there's different ways to get different textures and flavors. The longer you might roast things, you might get more of a succulent flavor if it's covered. If it's uncovered, you might get it a little drier and crispier. So you can actually take the same, say, sweet potato and get different flavors from it, whether it was covered or uncovered. And how thick it was cut will also determine how long it may need to cook. But I love covering them and sort of almost tucking them in. And then after about an hour or so, I open that pot and they've gone down about halfway. And they're really even sweeter and juicier. And then I also like to, you know, put some organic virgin olive oil and some salt, pepper. Sometimes I'll put in sprigs of rosemary. Sometimes I'll put in my marinated dried tomatoes or mushrooms. You know, different things that are going to add flavor. Other herbs, maybe whole cloves of garlic or slices of garlic. Or if I'm trying to do an Indian, I might put in like some ginger, turmeric, you know, fennel seeds, cumin seeds. Maybe I want it spicy, I throw in a little cayenne. So that's also what keeps me inspired. It's like, oh, this time I'm roasting the vegetables, I'm going for Mediterranean herbs and spices. This time I'm doing kind of an Indian. This time I change it up a little bit and maybe make it a little African. It could be the same vegetable combination, but it'll have a different flavor by the spices. Yeah, good question. Other questions?
Do you also bake things?
Mm-hmm. You mean pastries?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that any recommendation to do, not to do?
Well, again, I'm looking at, you know, organic ingredients. So unless it's hard to get, for instance, like I bake a lot with teff flour, and teff is not readily accessible as organic. I know the company that I get it from, and I know they're accessing it from lots of different farmers, and it's natural.
But in terms of other things like flour, yeast, and baking soda powder, is there anything avoid or something?
Again, I would avoid like the xanthan gum. I would avoid anything I can't pronounce. You know, sometimes you...
So the yeast, baking soda powder, that's all good?
Yeah, I've never used baking soda for baking. I know like that's something I've seen in recipes and it kind of gives a rise to things. I use a lot of baking sodas to like clean my sink. You know, clean my bathroom. I've seen it in recipes and I've never, I don't understand the chemistry of what it does, and I've never in over 30 years used it and said, oh, I think it needs baking soda, you know? Baking soda, I think, gives a little more rise to things, but I know in gluten-free baking, you're not going to get much of a rise, but if you do want a rise, then I use like grass-raised or pasture-raised organic eggs, and I beat them up, and there is a little rise.
Does the yeast also do the rise?
The yeast also does the rise, but even if you're making like a sourdough bread, or you're making cookies, or you're making pie crusts, you don't need yeast. There's naturally occurring yeast in the air, so like all the sourdoughs will rise without yeast. If I make, certain breads need yeast, and if I'm making that kind of bread where I'm kneading it on and off all day long, so it's gonna be a rise, like if I'm using a wheat, I might use some yeast. But again, I look at like, what's the cleanest yeast I could buy? You know, where am I buying? What's the rhythm of the store or the person that I'm buying it from? Has that product been sitting on the shelf forever? When I pick up that package of yeast, is it dusty? What's the date on it? If I reach to the back of the shelf, is there something fresher? You know, so I don't do a lot of baking with yeast. But I have done, I did do a pizza dough once that needed some yeast, and I remember going to the store, the big things of yeast, and I was like, could I just get a little? So I'm the kind of shopper that I've been taught by my grandmother and my mother to ask, you know, make them go in the back, or like, I don't need this much, I don't use it regularly, can I get a little bit like that? They're like, sure. They go in the back, they package it, they mark it up, and then I'm not wasting a lot of the product. Yeah, but I love to bake. I make loads of, I like cookies and pies, cakes, and I don't generally bake my own bread anymore, but I used to.
Gluten-free or anything for baking?
For baking, I love the variety of gluten-free flours, so I generally, whenever I'm making pie crusts and cookies, I will use all-teff flour, or I'll do
What kind of is?
TEFF.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and teff is an ancient grain like quinoa, which most
Okay.
people have heard of. And I used to think of it as the women's grain because it's like a cup of teff is about almost 80% of the US RDA for iron.
And then do you just substitute whole wheat flour or wheat flour with the teff flour or another one, and that's enough?
Well, actually, there's a little bit more math. As much as I'm an intuitive chef, I love to exercise the left side of my brain or the other side of the brain, you know, to kind of combine the intuition. So teff is more dense, and so you're going to have to use either 25% less teff
Okay.
or 25% more liquid.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because it's more dense.
So I'm looking for recipes for Thanksgiving, specifically
Mhm.
gluten-free gravy and stuffing.
Mm-hmm.
If you have suggestions on that.
Yeah. For stuffing, I'll usually use whole grains. Like there's a recipe from a TV segment I did where I made a kasha stuffing, which is roasted buckwheat. And I think I put in a little chia seeds in there. I was working for a company that had chia seeds at the time. It was like, how can we use more of that? So I don't use breadcrumbs anymore. So I'll use whole grains. So I could make a stuffing with teff grain, I could use millet, I could use a bread. But if I'm thinking of a gluten-free bread, there are some. And you could certainly do whatever you did before with the gluten-free bread. But I like using the whole grains and having different textures, different flavors. And I find like the kasha stuffing that I did, I believe I put a little sage in, a little thyme. So it kind of had those Thanksgiving flavors.
And how about the gravy?
The gravy, I generally haven't eaten gravy in a while.
Okay.
But gravy sometimes comes like if you're eating a meat and there's some
Yeah.
gravy from that. Is that what you mean by
No, like
gravy?
turkey gravy, because I'm in charge, I always have made the gravy and I
Mhm.
just use regular flour. So is there a good substitute to that?
I would just get a gluten-free flour.
Okay.
Yeah, and try that. If it's teff, you may not need as much. You might try like a brown rice flour, or there are white rice flours. There are like 10 different gluten-free grains, so you can try a little bit of a sorghum flour. You could try like a quinoa flour.
Chickpea flour?
Chickpea
Chickpea
Okay.
flour is very easy to get.
Okay.
Yeah, there are just so many different flours that are made of beans and grains. You can also grind your own nuts and put that in there. A little ground almond flour or hazelnut flour, which adds to me a little more sweetness, which you can play with.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. More questions? Did you want to try the rainbow radish? Do you know the rainbow radish? And I also brought a dip, so want to try cilantro olive dip? Okay. Yeah, I think that, when you're cooking for people who have different diets, it's kind of like you do a little bit of research and you say, oh, well, what can they have?
Well, I'm the fussiest one, so I want to try to make something for me that other people will eat, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, I always, many years ago when I started going to my sister-in-law's for Thanksgiving, the first time I went, I felt like a victim. I didn't bring anything because they had tons of food, and I couldn't eat anything. Not because I was thinking gluten-free, because their standards of natural weren't up to mine. So I just was like, well, it's family, but I'm not going to eat marshmallow fluff. It's like, I don't really want that. And the canned tomato and the canned cranberry sauce, I don't really want that. So the next year I said, you know what, I'm going to bring an onion soup. And I made my own herb croutons. And that became a tradition. And then I started making this, which actually is going well in the kitchen. I made a goat cheese mushroom strudel. And then I made a tempeh stew instead of the turkey, and it had parsley and sage and rosemary and the traditional kind of herb combinations, but it was tempeh, and it had the meaty flavor, and it had some vegetables, so it was all in one stew. So the longer I kept saying, what would I like, those became the traditional dishes. And so they would still have all the other stuff, but they would say, would you bring this? Or we'll make this now. Because the recipes became available in my cookbook. They'd say, we're going to make that goat cheese strudel because my older daughter became a vegetarian, so it was like, okay, what's Emily going to eat? And so those things became traditions, and then it's like, oh, well, I think I want something else, so what would I like this year? So I like to keep inventing recipes. Or sometimes, as we're noting now with climate change, different things are not coming in the same combinations as they used to, so it's like, Or pumpkin pie. Pumpkin pie, generally everybody's just adding a lot of sugar to. So I was like, well, what if I used yams? What if I used butternut squash?
Squash is the best, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, well, I'm still calling it pumpkin pie, but there's no pumpkin in it. And then what about the sweetener? Maybe I'm using date sugar. Maybe I'm using coconut sugar. Maybe I'm using maple syrup or maple sugar. And then maybe I'm making it without dairy. Maybe I'm making it without eggs. So then I've learned how to use chia seeds and coconut milk to add more sweetness from the coconut milk. So what other foods can I add that's sweet without adding sugar? So maybe I'm grinding up some dates in with the squash. And then it's like, oh, well, there's 5 different, 6 different, 8 different possibilities. What do I have in stock? What am I in the mood for? Oh, what's Leslie's recipe say? Okay.